Title: I discovered my wife's infidelity after my cancer diagnosis, so I rewrote my will. The day I was diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma, my world shrank to the size of a sterile, dimly lit doctor's office. The air smelled of antiseptic, and something heavier. Fate, maybe. Dr. Rosen's voice droned on about treatment options, chemotherapy cycles, and survival rates. But I heard only the distant hum of betrayal yet to be uncovered. A month later, when the nausea from chemo had settled into my bones and my hair had started thinning, I made the discovery that shattered me more than the illness ever could. It was a text message, one I wasn't supposed to see. I can't wait to be in your arms again. He'll be at the hospital all day. I love you. The message wasn't meant for me. It was sent from my wife's phone. Alice, the woman I had trusted for 12 years, the woman who had promised in sickness and in health. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding like a war drum in my ears. The name attached to the message made my stomach drop. Daniel Mercer, my best friend, my business partner. The man who had stood beside me as my best man a decade ago. I was dying, and my wife was in love with another man. The investigation begins. At first, I refused to believe it. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe, God help me, I was hallucinating from the medication. But the unease festered inside me, and when Alice left for errands that evening, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. She didn't go to the grocery store. She didn't go to visit her sister. She drove straight to the Hilton downtown, where Daniel was waiting in the lobby. I sat in my car across the street and watched them embrace, his hand slipping down her back, her lips pressing against his ear as she whispered something. Then, fingers intertwined, they disappeared into the elevator. It was real. The betrayal was real. Rewriting. My will be. The time I got home, my body was racked with pain, but I forced myself to stay up, staring at my laptop screen with a single thought circling like a vulture. I will not let them win. Alice had been my beneficiary. She would have inherited everything, our house, my shares in the company, my investments, but not anymore. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Evan Carter. I told him I wanted to change my will. I need it done fast, I said. Effective immediately. Evan hesitated. Michael, are you sure? You're in a vulnerable state. Maybe take some time. I don't have time, I cut in. Make the changes now. I removed Alice entirely. Instead, I left my assets to a trust, which would distribute everything to my estranged sister, Rachel, and a charity for cancer research. My company shares? I sold them off, liquidating everything so that by the time Alice and Daniel found out, there'd be nothing left for them. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The final play, I hired a private investigator. Not just to confirm what I already knew, but to gather proof, indisputable proof, of their affair. And what I found made my blood run cold. Alice and Daniel had been seeing each other for 3 years. The affair started long before my diagnosis. I had been living a lie, while the two people I trusted most plotted behind my back. But the worst part? They had planned for my death. Emails, text messages, a recorded phone call my PI managed to get his hands on. Daniel. It won't be long now. The chemo is wearing him down. As soon as he's gone, we'll finally be together. Alice. I just need to hold on a little longer. The money will be ours. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were counting on it. The confrontation. I set the stage carefully. A dinner at home. Just Alice and me. I could barely stomach food anymore, but I forced myself to sit across from her, watching as she smiled sweetly, as if she weren't the devil in disguise. You look tired, sweetheart, she said, pouring me a glass of wine. You should rest after dinner. She had no idea that I had already set everything in motion. My lawyer had filed the new will that morning. My private investigator had given me everything I needed. And so, I smiled. I know about Daniel. Alice froze. The wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. What? I know everything. 3 years. The hotel meetings, the emails, the plans you made for after I was gone. Her face turned white. Michael, it's not what you think. Don't insult me. The room was deathly silent. Her eyes darted toward the door, but I wasn't finished. You won't get a single cent, I said, my voice calm. I changed my will, sold my shares, liquidated my assets. You and Daniel will be left with nothing. Alice paled further, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Michael, please. You don't understand. I leaned forward. I understand perfectly. You married me for stability. You stayed with me for my money. And when I got sick, you saw an opportunity. You were just waiting for me to die so you could cash out. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Check our accounts. Rebuilding from the ashes. The first morning after Alice was gone, my house felt hollow. Silent in a way that was almost eerie. But it wasn't loneliness I felt. It was relief. For the first time in months, I wasn't living in the shadow of a lie. I wasn't being played for a fool. I spent the next few weeks tying up loose ends. My lawyer finalized everything, making sure Alice had no legal recourse to contest my will. I spoke with our bank and investment firms, ensuring that any lingering ties between us were severed. Alice, now locked out of all our accounts, tried to call me repeatedly. I never answered. As for Daniel, his life collapsed like a house of cards. When I liquidated my company shares, it caused a chain reaction that forced a restructuring. His name came up in an internal audit and, as it turned out, he had been skimming money for years. The board fired him within a week. I didn't even have to lift a finger. Karma did all the work for me. Alice's desperation, one evening, about a month after I kicked her out, Alice showed up at my door. She looked different, disheveled, bags under her eyes. The confidence, the smug arrogance that once dripped from her every word was gone. Michael, please, she whispered. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Talk about what? Tears welled in her eyes. I was stupid. I was selfish. I ruined everything. I don't know what to do. You think I care? My voice was cold, devoid of the emotion she was fishing for. I made a mistake, she choked out. Daniel, he left me. I smirked. Of course he did. Without my money, she was nothing to him. She grabbed my arm, desperation leaking into her voice. I loved you, Michael. I swear I did. I slowly removed her hand. No, Alice. You loved what I provided for you. You loved the security, the money, the comfort. I stepped back, eyes narrowing. But when I needed you the most, you chose someone else. You don't get to come back now that you've lost everything. A sob broke from her lips, and for a fleeting second, I almost felt something for her. Then I remembered the text, the emails, the whispered conversations she had with Daniel while she thought I was dying. And just like that, the last of my sympathy evaporated. Goodbye, Alice, I said, closing the door. She pounded on it for another 5 minutes before finally leaving. A new chapter. The months that followed were filled with slow healing. Physically, the chemotherapy was brutal, but my latest scans showed improvement. The cancer was retreating. Emotionally, that was harder. I had spent years believing in a love that never truly existed. Accepting that truth was like grieving a death. But life moves forward. And so did I. One evening, I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Rachel. My sister. We had fallen out years ago over something petty, something I couldn't even remember anymore. But when she heard about my illness, she reached out. We met for coffee the next day, and to my surprise, it felt natural, easy, like we had never been apart. For the first time in a long time, I realized not all love is a lie. Final closure 1. Last loose end remained. Daniel. I hadn't seen him since everything fell apart, but fate has a way of bringing things full circle. One night, while leaving a restaurant, I spotted him across the street. He looked worse than Alice, unkempt, slumped shoulders, a defeated man, something inside me twisted. But it wasn't pity. It was satisfaction. Daniel caught my eye and froze. I saw it in his face. The shame, the regret, the realization that he had lost everything. He took a hesitant step toward me, like he wanted to say something. I simply smirked. Then I turned and walked away, because I had already won. Epilogue. A second chance. At life a year later, my cancer was in remission. The doctor called it a miracle. I called it a second chance. I moved to a new city, started fresh. My relationship with Rachel was stronger than ever. I even began dating again, tentatively, carefully. Trust wasn't easy, but I was learning. Alice and Daniel? They became nothing more than ghosts of a past life, whispers in the wind. I didn't just survive them, I thrived, and I would never let anyone take advantage of me again. The end. Would you like an alternate ending with more twists? Or do you prefer this satisfying conclusion? A shadow from the past life was finally moving forward. My health was improving. My past was behind me. And for the first time in years, I felt free. But peace never lasts forever. It started with small things. A blocked number calling late at night. Silence on the other end before the line went dead. A strange car parked down the street from my new home, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Then, one evening, I came home to find my apartment door slightly open. I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. I pushed the door open, stepping inside cautiously. Nothing seemed out of place at first. But then I saw it. A single envelope sitting on my kitchen counter. I picked it up, my hands steady despite the cold wave of dread washing over me. Inside was a photograph. It was of me, taken that morning. And underneath, a single handwritten note, you took everything from me. Now it's my turn. My blood ran cold. Alice was back, and this time she wasn't alone. Would you like the story to take a psychological thriller turn, or should it stay grounded in drama and personal redemption? The game begins. The photograph sat on my counter for days, haunting me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting. It felt like a new chapter had begun, a dangerous one. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. It wasn't that I didn't trust them, but I needed to understand what Alice, or whoever was pulling her strings, wanted from me. I couldn't jump into panic without a plan. Days passed, and the strange occurrences continued. My mailbox was tampered with, and there was an unsettling knock on my door late one night. I checked the peephole, but there was no one there. The paranoia started to set in. I couldn't trust anything anymore. I was being hunted, and whoever was after me had patience, an unsettling amount of patience. A familiar face it was a Friday afternoon when I received an unexpected visitor. I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on work, when I heard a soft knock. I opened the door, and standing there, wearing a tired expression, was someone I hadn't seen in months. Daniel. His presence in front of me was like a ghost from my past, and I didn't know whether to slam the door in his face or hear him out. I chose the latter. What do you want? My voice was sharp, trying to mask the simmering anger beneath. I need to talk, he said, his voice shaking slightly. It's about Alice. I sighed, stepping back to let him in. I don't want to talk about her, Daniel. She's the last thing I need right now. I understand, he said quietly, sitting down. on the couch. But she's not just after you anymore, she's after me too, and I think she's involved with someone else. Someone who's not afraid to do whatever it takes to get what they want. I stiffened. What are you talking about? His eyes flicked nervously around the room. I don't know everything, but I think Alice is planning something. Something dangerous. She thinks that if she can destroy us, our lives, everything we have left, she can find a way back. But it's not just her. This person she's with, they're dangerous. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought I was free. I thought I had left everything behind. But the past had never truly let me go. I leaned forward. What does this person want? What are they planning? Daniel paused, his face twisted with fear. I don't know, Michael, but I think you're their next target. The investigation unfolds. I couldn't take Daniel's warning lightly. That night, I began digging into Alice's past, looking for any connection to dangerous people. I called a few of my old contacts, former colleagues who might still be in touch with the underground circles I had once worked with. It didn't take long to find out that Alice had been associating with a man named Victor O'Connor. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Victor was a corporate fixer, a man with a reputation for solving problems, no matter the cost. He was known for his ruthlessness, a man who didn't care about the morality of his methods as long as he got paid. And that was enough for me to understand why Alice would seek him out. I started tracking his movements. I hired a private investigator to tail him, uncovering his connections to some of the dirtiest players in the criminal underworld. He was a problem, one that I hadn't anticipated. It was clear now that this wasn't just a personal vendetta from Alice. She had brought in a professional, and if I didn't act fast, it could be the end of everything I had rebuilt. A desperate move one night, as I sat in my office reviewing the information on O'Connor, my phone rang. It was Rachel. Michael, you need to get out of there, she said, urgently. I've been following the trail. Alice and O'Connor, they know where you are. I felt a chill run through me. How do you know that? Because I've been watching them. They've been watching you for weeks. I froze. Rachel. She had been digging, too. But why? Why hadn't she told me sooner? Why didn't you tell me? I demanded. I couldn't. I wasn't sure if I could trust you, if I could trust what I was seeing. But now... Michael, they're closing in. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed a bag, packed a few essentials, and prepared to leave. But as I turned to exit the apartment, I heard a knock, not from the door, but from the window. I glanced over, and there, standing just outside, was Alice. Her face was pale, eyes hollow with desperation. I'm sorry, Michael, she whispered, her voice cracking. Please let me explain. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I couldn't decide if I wanted to slam the window shut or hear her out. But something in her eyes, the raw fear, made me hesitate. The final twist Alice's confession was unexpected. She spoke in broken sentences, explaining how she had become entangled in something much bigger than herself. How Victor had used her as a pawn in a larger game, one that had spun, out of control. I was trying to fix it, Michael. I swear I was, she said. But when I saw you rewrite your will, it changed everything. The battle for survival, the decision was made. But it was far from easy. Alice and I met in secret, hidden away from prying eyes, trying to strategize our next move. She revealed the full extent of Victor O'Connor's network, how he had ties to corrupt officials, underground business dealings, and people who weren't afraid to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. I didn't know how deep it went until I was already in too far, Alice confessed. Her face was pale, eyes shadowed with regret, but there was an edge of determination in her voice. But Michael, you have to understand, I never wanted any of this. I only wanted to save us. I didn't think it would spiral out of control. I could barely process it all. The woman who had betrayed me, who had torn apart everything I thought I knew about our life together, was now offering me a chance to fight back. There was a strange irony to it. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. I didn't know if I could ever trust her again, but at this moment, I didn't have the luxury of doubt. I had to focus on surviving. "Victor is playing a game," Alice said, "and right now you're his biggest pawn. But you don't have to be. We can turn the tables, Michael. We can expose everything, destroy his empire from the inside out." I didn't know if it was optimism or sheer desperation, but I agreed. The time for passive survival was over. It was time to take control of the narrative. A dangerous game. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of secret meetings, coded messages, and planning. Alice gave me access to her contacts within Victor's organization, and I began pulling strings, gathering intelligence, identifying weaknesses, and connecting the dots. I had never felt so far from my old life, yet I was closer than ever to something that could break the entire system wide open. One evening, I received an encrypted message from Rachel, who had been investigating from a distance. She had uncovered a critical piece of information. Victor O'Connor was about to make a major move, one that would eliminate anyone who stood in his way, including me. It wasn't just about money or power anymore. It was personal. Victor was making me a target to send a message to anyone else who dared to challenge him. That night, Alice and I made our final preparations. We didn't know what to expect, but we were both ready to face whatever came next. The Reckoning. The final confrontation came faster than I anticipated. Alice and I found ourselves at a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town, an old, abandoned space that had become the headquarters for Victor and his associates. It was here that we would make our move, where the culmination of weeks of planning would either lead to our survival or our destruction. I parked the car far from the entrance, the tension thick in the air. Alice glanced over at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. I didn't respond immediately, my mind replaying the events that had led me here, the cancer diagnosis, the betrayal, the shattered trust, the terrifying realization that I wasn't just fighting for my life, but for everything I had left. "I'm ready," I said finally, my voice steady despite the racing heart in my chest. We moved quickly, navigating through the shadows toward the warehouse. The building loomed before us like a sleeping giant, its dark windows offering no glimpse of what lay inside. I could hear my breath in the silence, my footsteps muffled against the cold concrete. And then, just as we reached the entrance, we were met with an unexpected sight. Victor himself, standing in the doorway. His face was grim, his eyes sharp as he studied us both. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice dripping with cold amusement. "But I didn't expect you to bring her." He nodded toward Alice, his gaze calculating. Alice stepped forward, her expression hardening. "This ends tonight, Victor." A low chuckle escaped him. "You think you can stop me? Do you really believe you have the power to take me down?" I didn't wait for his response. I lunged, knocking him off balance, and a chaotic struggle erupted. It was raw and primal. No time for words, just survival. In the midst of the fight, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure in the shadows, Rachel. She had been right all along. She was here, not as an ally, but as part of something much darker. The final betrayal. Rachel stepped forward, her face cold and emotionless. "You thought you were fighting alone, Michael," she said softly. "But you were never the target. It was always you and Alice." I stopped mid-motion, my heart pounding as the realization hit. Rachel wasn't just a bystander. She had been playing me, using me to get to Alice. She had been Victor's inside connection all along. Alice's eyes widened in disbelief. You... But before she could say anything else, Rachel raised her gun, aiming it directly at Alice. Everything slowed down. The aftermath. The dust settled quickly after Alice's intervention. The police, as expected, arrived on the scene, but by the time they did, the alley was eerily quiet. The only sound was the distant hum of city traffic as the world continued to spin, oblivious to the bloodshed that had just unfolded. Victor's son, the man who had been groomed to take over his father's crumbling empire, now lay lifeless on the ground. Alice's involvement would forever remain a secret, her motives as inscrutable as her disappearance. I had been given a second chance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another step in a never-ending spiral, a return to normalcy. Or, not days turned into weeks, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to think that the worst was behind me. I returned to my home, my office, and tried to put together the pieces of my shattered life. But nothing felt the same. There was a hole in my chest that no amount of work or distractions could fill. Rachel was gone. I knew that for sure now. Her betrayal was buried beneath the weight of everything that had transpired, but I still couldn't shake the haunting question. Why had she done it? Why had she been a part of this madness? I had rewritten my will, ensuring that my estate and assets were carefully divided in a way that would protect me from any future attacks. The cancer treatments had worked, but the psychological toll was far heavier than any physical ailment could have been, the return of the shadows. But the ghosts of the past never stayed buried for long. It was during a quiet night at home, as I sat alone in my study, that I received another phone call. "Michael," a familiar voice said, sending a chill down my spine. It was Alice. "Where are you?" I asked, already rising from my chair, my pulse quickening. "I'm here," she replied cryptically, her voice strained. "I need to warn you again. It's not over. You think you've escaped, but you're wrong. There's someone else. Someone even more dangerous than Victor or his son." My heart skipped a beat. "Who?" Alice didn't answer. There was a muffled sound, like someone moving in the background. Then, the line went dead. I sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words pressing heavily against my chest. The deeper conspiracy. Couldn't ignore it. I had to know more. The past wasn't just haunting me, it was actively hunting me down. Over the next few days, I threw myself into investigation mode. I pulled strings, called in favors, and used every bit of leverage. I had to dig deeper into this mysterious new threat. The deeper I went, the darker the picture became. There was a network of people I had never seen or heard of, operating in the shadows, people who had their fingers in everything. They had orchestrated Victor's empire's rise and fall, and now they were moving to control what was left. But I couldn't understand who they were, or how they were connected to Rachel's betrayal. Every lead I followed seemed to dissolve into thin air, as if someone was deliberately pulling the strings to keep me from the truth. The unlikely ally breakthrough came one evening when I received a visit from an unexpected source. Jack Turner, a former associate of Victor's who had long since disappeared from the criminal scene. He was a man with a reputation for being able to find people and uncover secrets, no matter how deep they were buried. "I'm here because I owe you, Michael," he said, his voice gravelly, tired. He looked like a man who had seen too many. Things he couldn't forget. I sat down with him in my office, and he told me what he knew. "There's a higher player behind all of this," Jack said, lighting a cigarette. "Someone even Victor was afraid of. Someone who pulls the strings from the shadows. I don't know who they are, but they've been watching you since Victor's death." I leaned forward, the weight of his words sinking in. "I don't understand," I said. "Why me? What do they want from me?" Jack exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes flicking nervously toward the door. "You're more involved than you realize. Rachel, your will, the cancer, everything. It was all part of the plan. They wanted you in a vulnerable position, Michael. Now that you're still standing, they don't know what to make of it. But they won't stop until they've finished what they started. The final showdown. The pieces were finally falling into place, but I was no closer to understanding who was behind this twisted game. I knew one thing for certain. If I didn't make my move soon, I wouldn't be around to find out. With Jack's help, I began tracking down the people who had been moving in the shadows, using every resource at my disposal to gather information. There were false leads, dead ends, and moments of doubt, but I couldn't stop now. Then, one night, I received a call that would change everything. "Meet me at the old warehouse by the docks," a voice said, distorted by a filter. "If you want to know the truth, you'll come alone." The final act, Rachel stood before me, her eyes haunted, but the fire of something deeper, something darker, flickered in the way she held herself. My breath caught in my throat, and 1,000 questions raged in my mind, but one burned brightest. "Why? You think this was all about us, Michael?" she said, her voice low but steady. "It was never about us. It was about something bigger, something neither of us could ever have anticipated." I took a cautious step toward her, every instinct telling me to keep my distance. "What are you talking about?" My voice was tight with suspicion. "You betrayed me. You lied to me. We were part of this... What? Some grand conspiracy? Who else is involved?" Rachel hesitated, her eyes darting to the shadows around us, as though someone might be lurking just out of sight. "They know you're not the same." "Michael," she said, "they know you can't be controlled anymore. That's why they're coming for you. It's not just about your will. It's about everything you know." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "Who are they? Who's pulling the strings?" Her lips curled into a grim smile, but there was a sadness in her eyes that made my stomach churn. "The same people who destroyed Victor. The same people who destroyed me. They're everywhere, and they've been watching you since the moment you decided to rewrite your will, since you decided to survive." I froze. "So, you weren't just betraying me for love or for money. You were a part of their game the whole time." Rachel's eyes softened for a brief moment, but then the harshness returned. "I didn't want to be Michael. I wanted out. But once they pull you in, there's no getting out. They'll use your every weakness, twist your every decision. And now you've become their next target." Suddenly, the distant echo of footsteps grew louder, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't just facing Rachel. I was facing whatever they had been, preparing for me. Before I could react, the door to the warehouse slammed open, and 2 men emerged from the shadows. Both were dressed in black suits, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses despite the night. They moved with an eerie precision, as though they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. "I thought you'd be here," one of them said, his voice as smooth and calculated as the rest of his demeanor. "We've been waiting for you, Michael." Rachel stiffened beside me, her body language defensive. "You said this wouldn't happen. You said he wouldn't survive." The other man chuckled. "Did you honestly think you could control the outcome once he found out everything? This wasn't just about his will or his life. It was always about power, control. We needed him to fall, and now we need him to rise, because we need someone who isn't afraid to fight back." The weight of his words sank in slowly. "You're telling me," I said slowly, my voice trembling with disbelief, "you've been orchestrating all of this? Victor, my cancer, Rachel's betrayal. For what? To make me a puppet in your game?" They smiled like wolves circling their prey. "We weren't sure at first, but you're stronger than we thought. You survived. And now, we need your mind, your knowledge, your access to the things that Victor left behind, your potential." My blood ran cold. "What do you want from me?" "You'll find out soon enough," one of them replied, stepping closer. There's a meeting tomorrow night. A place where you'll either make the right choice or you'll never have the chance to make another again. Rachel stepped back, her face conflicted. You don't have to do this, Michael. You can walk away now. You can disappear, and they'll leave you alone. I turned to face her, the weight of her words heavy in my mind, but I knew I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't let this be my fate. Not after everything I had been through, everything I had fought for. Tell me what they want, I demanded. Tell me what you know. Rachel's eyes searched mine, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw the vulnerability beneath her cold exterior. They want power, Michael. They want control of everything that Victor's empire could have been, and they've chosen you. You're the key to all of it. I shook my head. You don't get it. I'm done being part of anyone's plan. I'm going to end this, once and for all. The unexpected betrayal the following night I arrived at the meeting place, an old, forgotten estate that had once been a luxurious mansion. The gates creaked as they opened, and I could feel the weight of every step I took toward the entrance. The air was thick with anticipation. Inside, a long table stretched before me, filled with shadowy figures I didn't recognize. At the head of the table sat one person, a figure who had been nothing more than a whisper in the background of my life, Victor's most trusted confidant, the man I had believed to be dead. Michael, he said, his voice smooth and familiar, though now laced with venom. The final twist. The room fell silent as I absorbed the weight of Rachel's betrayal. My heart pounded, my vision narrowing as I pieced everything together. It was her all along. She had been playing me from the start, using my vulnerability, my trust, my desperation for survival to further their sick game. And now, she was sitting at the table like she belonged there, like nothing had ever changed. I stood slowly, my mind whirling with anger and disbelief. You've been working with them the entire time? I asked, my voice low but seething. Rachel didn't flinch. She met my gaze coolly, as if she were just another player in this twisted game. I did what I had to do, Michael, she said quietly. For us. For our future. I laughed bitterly, the sound of it echoing through the cold, empty space. For us? Is that what you call this? You betrayed me. You lied to me. You knew about my cancer, about Victor, and you kept feeding me lies while you were working with them behind my back. Her eyes softened for a moment, but there was no remorse in them, only the cold, calculating gaze of someone who had long ago decided they were beyond redemption. I did what I thought was necessary. We were never going to make it, Michael. Not like this. I did it for both of us, even if you can't see it. I took a step toward her, my fists clenched at my sides. Don't you dare try to justify this, I spat. I gave you everything. My trust, my love, my life. And you threw it all away for power, for control, for this? Rachel's gaze flickered briefly to the others around the table, but she didn't look away. She stood firm, her eyes locked on mine. You think you're any different? You think you're any better than me? You're just as trapped in this as I am. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let them break me. I couldn't. Not after everything I had sacrificed, not after everything I had uncovered. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. You're wrong, I said, my voice steady now, despite the rage simmering inside me. I'm not trapped. I've already made my choice, and I'm going to make sure you and your precious partners pay for what you've done. I turned away from Rachel, ignoring her call to stay, and looked at the shadowy figures around the table. They could see the determination in my eyes. They could feel the shift in the room as I made my decision. The power, the control. They thought they had it. But I wasn't going to let them take everything from me, not when I was finally starting. To understand the true cost of this twisted game. I won't play by your rules anymore, I said, my voice ringing with finality. This ends now. The tension in the room thickened. The men at the table exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of how to respond. But the one who had been speaking earlier, the man I had once thought was dead, rose from his seat with a cold smile. "You think you can stop us, Michael?" he asked, his voice tinged with amusement. "You think you can escape this? You're in too deep." I didn't hesitate. I knew what I had to do. I reached into my coat and pulled out the small envelope, the letter, the one I had prepared just days before, the one that would expose everything, the one I had hidden, just in case this moment ever came. With a flick of my wrist, I threw it onto the table in front of them. The room fell silent again. "You want power?" I asked. "You want control? Then you should know something. This letter contains everything. All the secrets you've been hiding, all the lies you've spun. And I'm going to make sure it gets to the right people." There was a flicker of panic in the eyes of the men around the table. They realized too late that I had been playing my own game all along, that I had set a trap, and they had walked right into it. Rachel's face paled as she recognized what I had done. "Michael, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't. This will destroy everything." But it was too late. I had already taken the first step. There was no going back. The men at the table began to shift, murmuring among themselves, their calm exteriors cracking under the pressure. The man who had been Victor's confidant, the one who had orchestrated so much of this, was the first to react. His face contorted with fury as he lunged for the letter, but it was too late. I was already moving, already planning my next move. "You should have known better," I said, my voice cold, as I stepped back toward the door. "You never should have underestimated me." And then, with a final glance at Rachel, her face now a mixture of regret and fear, I left the room, leaving them to deal with the consequences of their own actions. The aftermath. The days that followed were a blur. The fallout from the letter was swift, the repercussions devastating. Every piece of evidence I had gathered, every secret I had uncovered, was now in the hands of the authorities. The return of the silence days turned into weeks, and I settled into a new rhythm, my days less clouded by anger and betrayal, though the scars of what had happened would never fully fade. Rachel's face still haunted my dreams, her hollow eyes, the way she had tried to justify her actions. It all left a bitter taste in my mouth. But I couldn't linger on it forever. Life had moved on, whether I was ready for it or not. I spent my time in solitude, digging deeper into the things I had neglected. The paperwork, the plans, the things I thought I could never bear to face. The cancer was still there, lurking in the background of my thoughts, but I no longer let it control me. It was just another piece of the puzzle, another battle to win. I received news about Rachel, about the fallout from the letter, and how it had unraveled her carefully constructed life. The authorities had closed in, dragging her down into the chaos she had tried to create for me. It was almost poetic the way things had worked out, but it didn't bring me satisfaction, only a deeper sense of emptiness. The phone call I had been expecting came one late afternoon, as the shadows stretched across the room. It was Victor's lawyer, the one I had been avoiding for weeks, and I had been bracing myself for this moment. He had news that would finalize everything, my will, the estate, and the lingering loose ends I had left behind in the wake of the upheaval. When I answered, his voice was businesslike, but there was a noticeable tension behind his words. "Mr. Alexander," he began, "I trust you're prepared for what comes next. The will, the legal proceedings, everything is in motion. It's going to be swift." I nodded into the phone, though he couldn't see it. "What do I need to do?" "Just show up," he said. "Sign the final documents. There are a few things we need to clarify, but you've set everything up as planned. It's time to close the door on the past." The weight of his words lingered in the air like a distant echo. The past. Everything that had come before. All. The pain, the lies, the manipulation, was just that. The past. But it was far from gone. The final signing it took me a few days to gather myself, to walk into that sterile office, to face the final chapter of this strange journey. When I arrived, I was greeted by the lawyer, a woman who had been helping me through the tangled web of legalities. She led me into a small room where everything had been set up. The papers lay on the table before me, final instructions for the estate, my health directive, and the will I had rewritten after the cancer diagnosis. There was a silence in the air as I sat down, my fingers grazing the edges of the papers. Everything was in place. The people I wanted to have my belongings would get them. The charities I had chosen would receive the funds. Rachel and the others who had betrayed me were left with nothing. "Are you sure about this?" the lawyer asked, watching me carefully. "You've made your choices. There's no turning back after this." I looked down at the papers. "I'm sure. It's the only way to take control of this." As I signed my name, the last remnants of my old life slipped away. The pain of betrayal, the hope for reconciliation, all vanished with each stroke of the pen. The finality of it hit me hard, but it was a release, too. It was done. The unexpected visitor. It was just a few days later, as I was reflecting on everything, when I heard the knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. It had been a long time since I had felt truly seen, since someone had entered my space without an invitation. I opened the door to find a figure I hadn't seen in years. The last person I expected to find standing on the other side was none other than Claire, the one person whose name had been whispered in my thoughts like a ghost. "Michael," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of something I couldn't quite place. I froze for a moment, unsure if I was hallucinating or if this was some twisted fantasy. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice betraying a mix of curiosity and caution. Claire hesitated, her gaze flickering to the ground before she met my eyes again. "I'm not here to make excuses. I'm not here to try and undo what happened. But there are things I need to tell you, things you need to know." I stepped back, the instinct to shut the door behind me strong, but curiosity got the better of me. "Come in." The truth comes. Out Claire stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room as if taking in every detail. She was older now, worn by time and the decisions she had made. She wasn't the woman I had once known, and yet she wasn't quite a stranger either. "I've been following your story," she began, her voice tinged with regret. "I know what happened with Rachel, with everything, and I need to confess something." I didn't respond right away, the old feelings of betrayal still fresh. "Go on," I said, my tone clipped. Claire took a deep breath before continuing. The edge of the abyss, I stood there in the alley with Elliot Vance, his words haunting me like an echo I couldn't shake. Everything I had believed about my life, about the betrayal, had just been turned on its head. It wasn't just a simple affair. It wasn't just my wife, Claire, and her deceit. This was something far more intricate, a web of lies spun across years, pulling in people I'd trusted and even those I hadn't known. And now, I was in the thick of it, caught in a game where the stakes were far higher than I had ever imagined. Vance studied me, his eyes calculating, measuring my response. "You want answers, Michael?" "Fine," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "But be careful. Once you start down this path, there's no turning back." I swallowed hard. "I'm already too deep. What's next? What do I need to do to take control of this, to expose the people behind it?" Vance smiled thinly, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "You think you're in control now? You're not. You were never in control. You were a tool, a pawn. But there's still time. You have one chance, Michael, one chance to turn this around. I didn't have the luxury of time, nor did I care. to entertain any more cryptic warnings. I needed clarity, needed action, something to break this cycle before it broke me. "Who's behind all of this?" I asked, my voice edged with desperation. Vance exhaled slowly, as though weighing the cost of revealing what he knew. "You think Rachel's betrayal was the end of it? No, it was the beginning. The real players are much closer than you think. It's not just your wife. It's Victor. It's Claire. And it's the man you trusted with your future. The one who took everything you had left. Richard." His name hit me like a ton of bricks. Richard, the one person I hadn't suspected at all. The trusted business partner. The man who had worked by my side, helping me through the most difficult years of my life. It had always seemed like he was genuinely concerned for me. Hadn't he been there when my diagnosis hit? Hadn't he shown sympathy when I was grappling with what lay ahead? But now, everything about him felt tainted. What had I missed? What signs had I ignored? I stood frozen for a moment, struggling to wrap my mind around the enormity of it. "Richard?" I repeated, the name like poison on my tongue. "So he's the one pulling the strings?" Vance nodded, his expression unreadable. "He's the one with the power, Michael. He's the one who's been orchestrating this entire charade. He's the one who decided when and how your life would be rewritten. And he's not going to stop. Not until he has what he wants." My chest tightened as the pieces fell into place. Richard had always been the one with the most to gain. He knew my vulnerabilities. He knew about my business, my personal life. He had access to everything. I had trusted him. Hell, I had considered him family, but now he was the enemy, a dangerous alliance. I knew then what I had to do. The time for hesitation was over. It wasn't just about confronting Claire or Rachel. It wasn't just about getting revenge on Victor for his involvement. No. The true battle lay ahead, and I had to confront the man who had been manipulating me from the shadows all along. But I couldn't do it alone. "Vance," I said, my voice low, "you know how to play this game. How do I get to Richard? How do I get to the truth without losing everything?" Vance studied me for a long moment, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're smarter than most people who come to me. You're willing to face the truth head on." He paused, then continued. "You can't do this alone. Richard's not the only one pulling the strings. You need allies, people on your side who know how to navigate the treacherous waters you're about to dive into. But trust me when I say, Michael, not everyone who appears to be an ally is." I nodded, a bitter smile creeping across my face. "So now, I trust you." Vance's smile was thin but genuine. "You're not trusting me, Michael. You're using me. And that's the only way this ends." The plan: we spent the next few hours in a dingy back room of the bar, huddled over a map of the city, tracing connections between Richard, Claire, and the others. Vance was cold and methodical, guiding me through the steps we needed to take. It was clear that he had been working in the shadows for a long time, watching people and making moves when necessary. I felt a chill creeping into my bones as I listened to him. The world he was describing was a dark, ruthless one, a place where loyalty was as disposable as a piece of paper and power was everything. "Here's the deal," Vance said, tapping the map with a finger. "Richard is a businessman, yes, but his power isn't just in money. It's in his connections, the people he's aligned with. He's got connections in high places, Michael. Lawyers, politicians, corporate bigwigs. You try to expose him and he'll bury you before you even get started. The unseen enemy." I watched Rachel disappear into the darkness, her figure melting into the night like a shadow. Her words hung in the air, unnerving in their ambiguity. "Someone else has been watching you. Someone who has more to lose than anyone else?" Who could she mean? Had Vance been playing me, leading me deeper into a trap? Or was there something more insidious at play? I had to find out. I needed to be sure of who I could trust and who I could not. I headed home, my mind a whirlwind of possibilities. As I entered the dimly lit apartment, the walls felt closer than ever, suffocating me with the weight of the lies that had been building for years. Claire had played me, but now, it seemed, there was a greater force at work. A force I couldn't even begin to comprehend. The investigation unfolds. The next day, I dug deeper into Richard's life. I spent hours on the phone with private investigators, pulling strings and leveraging my contacts. It wasn't just about finding dirt on Richard anymore. I needed to know who else was in this tangled web. Every turn seemed to reveal a new layer of deceit. One investigator, a former hacker turned private eye named Simon, had uncovered something that made my blood run cold. "I've got something you'll want to see," Simon said over the phone, his voice tight with excitement. "You need to meet me at the old mill on the outskirts of town. You won't believe what I've found." I didn't hesitate. The urgency in Simon's voice told me this was it, the clue that would crack the whole thing wide open. The moment I arrived, I saw him standing by the entrance to the decrepit building, his eyes darting nervously. "Everything's connected, Michael," Simon said, leading me inside. "Richard's not just a businessman. He's been laundering money through a shell company. And that's not the worst part. There's a pattern in the transactions, one that lines up with Claire's personal account. It's not just business, it's personal." I felt the air leave my lungs. My wife, my partner, my confidant, had been involved in something much darker than I'd ever imagined. Claire wasn't just sleeping with Richard, she was helping him, but why? Simon continued, "There's something else. I couldn't get everything from the secure servers, but the pattern is clear. There's an end game in sight, Michael, and it's coming faster than you think." I clenched my fists. My head spun. The pieces were falling into place, but each new revelation only led to more questions. What was Claire's end game? Was she in this for the money? Or was it revenge? A dangerous liaison. I didn't wait for the pieces to fit themselves. I couldn't afford to. Armed with the new information from Simon, I set up a meeting with someone I'd been avoiding for years. Victor, the ex-business partner who had been part of Claire's betrayal. I found him at a dimly lit diner in the middle of nowhere. His back was to me as I slid into the booth opposite him. He didn't look up when I spoke, but I could feel the tension in his shoulders. "I know everything, Victor," I said, my voice steady but filled with venom. "I know what you've been up to, and I know about Claire. This isn't just about business, is it?" Victor finally turned to face me, his eyes narrow and calculating. "You don't know the full story," he said, his voice low. "You think it's just about the money or Claire's affair? You're wrong, Michael. This goes deeper than you realize." I leaned forward, pushing my anger aside for the moment. "Then tell me, what is it really about?" Victor glanced around nervously before speaking again. "Claire's been setting you up from the start. It was never just about money. It was always about control. She wanted everything. Your life, your business, your legacy. And Richard? He was her partner in this whole game. But the thing is, they were working for someone else. Someone much more powerful." The words hit me like a tidal wave. Someone else, the real mastermind. "Who?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Who's pulling the strings?" Victor hesitated for a moment before he muttered a name, almost as if saying it out loud would curse him. "Elliot Vance." My blood ran cold. Vance. The same man who had warned me, the same man who had become an unlikely ally. The man who had claimed to be helping me was the one behind the curtain all along. "I should have known," I muttered. "He's been guiding me toward Richard and Claire, but in the end, it was all part of his plan. He's been manipulating me the whole time." Victor nodded slowly, his eyes filled with regret. "Vance controls everything. He always has. Richard, Claire, they're just pawns. You're the real target, Michael. You were the prize all along, but you're still alive, and that's something Vance didn't plan on. I sat back, the weight of the revelation sinking in. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. The final confrontation. The pieces were in place, and there was no turning back now. I knew what I had to do. The reckoning. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one a battle to maintain the fragile control I had over my own life. Vance, though shaken by my maneuver, was not someone who could be taken down so easily. He had more influence than I could have ever imagined, a network of loyalists in places I never even thought to look. But now it was my turn to play the game. Victor's words echoed in my mind. You're the real target, Michael. You were the prize all along. It had all been about me, my downfall. And yet, despite everything, I was still standing. The pieces I'd laid out so carefully had begun to snap into place, one by one. Claire's betrayal, Richard's complicity, Vance's manipulation, all of it led to this final confrontation. I watched as the world around me shifted. It wasn't just about taking down the people who had wronged me anymore. It was about taking back my life, my legacy. I had to be careful now. Vance was always 3 steps ahead, always watching. But the truth was, I had learned the rules of his game. And now I knew how to break them. A new alliance. The next move came from an unexpected place. A message arrived late one evening, cryptic and simple. Meet me at the docks at midnight. It's time to settle the score. I had my suspicions, but something told me this wasn't just Vance playing more games. It was too direct, too bold. I made my way to the docks, the eerie silence of the water stretching out before me. Shadows danced across the murky surface, the faint sound of waves breaking against the concrete as I waited. And then I saw him, David Mercer, the man who had once been a part of Claire's scheme to bring me down. He stood there, alone, his expression hard, as he watched me approach. "Mercer," I said, my voice steady but filled with distrust. "What the hell are you doing here?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lit a cigarette, the tip flaring in the dark before he exhaled. Slowly. "I've been trying to figure out who the hell you are, Michael. But now I know. You're not the guy they thought you were. Not anymore. You were always more than they gave you credit for." I frowned. "Cut the crap. What do you want?" Mercer leaned in, his voice lowered to a whisper. "I'm done being a pawn. And I think you are too. Vance, he's going to destroy everything. All of us. I'm here to offer you an alliance. You take down Vance, and I help you make sure he never walks away from this. Together we end this once and for all." I studied him for a moment. Mercer had always been a wild card, a man driven by his own ambition. But there was something in his eyes now, something desperate. Maybe it was regret, or maybe it was fear. "Why should I trust you?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because I have nothing left to lose," Mercer replied, his tone dark and resolute. "Vance's game? It's over. But if you don't act, we'll all burn." I weighed his words carefully. The lines between friend and foe had blurred so many times, I couldn't even tell which side anyone was on anymore. But there was one thing. I knew for sure Vance was the real enemy, the puppet master behind it all. "All right," I said finally, meeting his gaze. "We do this together. But if you double-cross me, Mercer, I'll end you. Understand?" He nodded. "I'm with you." The final play, the plan we devised, was a careful one. Vance had made his moves in the shadows, but now we would pull him into the light. It was time to confront him head-on, to make him realize that his empire of lies would crumble beneath the weight of the truth. Mercer used his connections to get close to Vance's inner circle, feeding him just enough false information to create a rift. Meanwhile, I took care of the financial side, gathering the evidence, preparing the documents that would expose his money laundering and fraudulent dealings. But we couldn't just expose him. We needed to make him feel the consequences, to leave him with no way out. It took weeks of careful planning, but the moment finally arrived. We had Vance cornered. The stage was set for the final act. I arrived at Vance's penthouse late one night, the city skyline glittering like 1,000 stars below. The door opened, and there he was, Vance, calm as ever, sitting in a chair with his back to me. He didn't even flinch as I stepped inside. "So," I said, my voice laced with cold fury, "this is how it ends, Vance. All the years of manipulation, the lies, the schemes, it's over." Vance didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He was always 3 steps ahead. "You think I didn't know this was coming?" he said, his voice calm. "I've known for weeks. You've been playing right into my hands, Michael, just like everyone else." I took a step closer. "No, Vance, you've underestimated me, and that's where you failed." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the documents. Evidence of Vance's crimes, his network, the strings he'd been pulling all along. I laid them on the table in front of him. He turned, his eyes narrowing. For the first time, the final chapter. The weeks that followed were quieter than I ever imagined they would be. With Vance gone, Claire facing her legal battles, and the ghosts of the past finally beginning to fade, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The fight had taken so much from me, and though I had won, I couldn't ignore the emptiness that lingered. But even in the midst of victory, the truth hit me with an undeniable clarity. Everything I had fought for, everything I had endured, had been for my freedom. It was freedom from the manipulation, the lies, and the betrayal that had haunted me for years. Yet, now that I had it, I realized that I had no one to share it with. Sophia, the one constant in my life through all the twists and turns, had stood by me when no one else had. Her presence was a quiet anchor in the chaos, a reminder that even after everything, there was still hope for redemption, for rebuilding. She had been there when I needed someone to trust, when the weight of my decisions had been too heavy to bear alone. And now, as I sat in the quiet of the apartment, feeling the weight of the years slowly lifting off my shoulders, I knew it was time to take the next step, both for me and for us. Rebuilding one evening, as the golden light of dusk filtered through the window, I found Sophia sitting on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands. Her face was calm, but I could see the quiet sadness in her eyes, the same sadness I had been carrying for so long. "Sophia," I began, my voice tentative, unsure of how to even start. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next, about everything." She looked at me, her expression soft. "We don't have to figure it all out right now, Michael. You've been through so much. I'm here for whatever you need." I took a deep breath, standing up to walk toward her. The weight of the past was still there, but it didn't feel as suffocating anymore. The plans I'd set in motion, the revenge that had consumed me, had finally allowed me to see the bigger picture. "I don't know what the future holds, Sophia," I said, kneeling in front of her, taking her hands in mine. "But I know I want to rebuild. Not just my life, but everything. I don't want to live in the shadows of the past anymore." Sophia's gaze never wavered, her hands tightening around mine. "You don't have to rebuild it alone. Whatever happens, I'm here. We'll rebuild together." Her words were like a balm to my wounded soul. They offered me the kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. I could see the possibility of a future, a real future, just beyond the horizon. A new beginning in the days that followed, I started to rebuild, piece by piece. No longer was I defined by the man who had been betrayed, or the vengeful figure who had set out to destroy those who had wronged him. I was something else now. Someone else. A man who had fought for his life, who had survived, and who was now ready to move forward. Claire's legal battle continued, but it was no longer a shadow looming over me. The chapters of betrayal and manipulation had been closed, and now I could focus on the life I had left to live. There were new paths to explore, new dreams to chase, and Sophia was right there beside me, a steady presence in my life, reminding me of the love and strength we could build together. I visited my old office one last time to retrieve some things. As I stood there looking at the papers and artifacts of my former life, I realized that I had nothing left to prove. The war was over, and I was finally free. On my way out, I stopped at the window, looking out at the city below. It was alive, vibrant, teeming with possibilities. The man who had once been lost in the fog of betrayal was no longer there. In his place stood someone who had fought for their freedom, for their peace. The unexpected twist, but as I was about to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I picked it up, seeing an unknown number flash across the screen. For a moment, I hesitated. After everything, I didn't want to face more bad news, but something urged me to pick up. "Michael," a voice on the other end said, sharp and clear. It was a voice I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. It was Claire. "Claire," I said, my tone flat. "I didn't expect to hear from you," she chuckled, though it sounded more like a nervous laugh. "I don't expect you to believe this, but I need to talk to you. There's something you need to know about everything." I froze. I had expected this, but not like this. Not now. "What is it?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "What could you possibly say that hasn't already been said?" Claire's voice was filled with regret. "You don't know everything, Michael. About Vance, about me, about how deep this goes. There's more to the story. Something you need to hear. Please, before it's too late." A chill ran down my spine. Could there be more to uncover? After everything I had gone through, was I really finished with this nightmare? The unraveling against my better judgment? I agreed to meet her. I arrived at the agreed meeting spot, an old, dimly lit cafe tucked away on a quiet street corner, the kind of place where people came to disappear, to bury their secrets under layers of steamed windows and half-empty cups of coffee. The smell of stale pastries lingered in the air, mixing with the distant hum of city life just outside. I sat at a table in the back, alone for now, watching the door. My fingers drummed anxiously on the table, the quiet tapping a reflection of my racing thoughts. What was Claire going to say? What could she possibly offer now that everything had crumbled? The door opened with a soft chime, and there she was, Claire. Her once confident stride had faltered, replaced with an uncertain hesitation. She was different now, her eyes rimmed with red, her face pale. For the first time since all this began, I saw the cracks in the mask she had worn for so long. I gestured for her to sit, my gaze sharp but controlled. "Let's hear it then," I said, my voice low but firm. "You've got 5 minutes to explain why I'm still listening to you." Claire hesitated, biting her lip as she sank into the chair across from me. She looked like she was still piecing herself together, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. But then, she met my gaze. This time, there was no defiance, no superiority, just a kind of broken sincerity that I hadn't seen before. "I know you don't trust me," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you need to understand that all of it wasn't just about me." I raised an eyebrow, leaning in slightly. "Then who, Claire? Who else was behind this?" She exhaled, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Elliot Vance. He's been working with someone else, someone even higher up than him. The money, the schemes, they were just the beginning. Michael, they were going to ruin you. Not just financially, but personally. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to lash out. I had already known Vance was involved in something larger. But this was a whole new level. My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. "Who are they, Claire? Who's pulling the strings?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. She looked away, swallowing hard before looking back at me, her voice cracking. "I didn't know at first, but I found out too late. They wanted me to destroy you, to push you to the edge. And they were going to use your health, your diagnosis against you. I didn't know how to get out." I leaned back in my chair, trying to absorb her confession. Every word she spoke seemed like a thread unraveling, each piece revealing a larger, more sinister tapestry. "But why?" I asked, struggling to make sense of the betrayal. "Why get involved in all of this if you knew it was going to destroy everything?" She paused, her eyes welling with tears, and for the first time, I saw the person she had once been. The woman I had loved, the woman who had laughed with me in better times. "Because they had something on me, Michael," she whispered. "They had. Pictures, videos. They knew things I didn't even know about myself, and they used them to manipulate me. I thought I was doing it for us, for our future, but it was a lie, a trap. I was already in too deep." I studied her face, seeing the pain that she had hidden for so long. There were no more excuses, no more games. It was clear now, Claire was as much a victim as she was a villain, trapped in a web that she hadn't known how to escape. But that didn't erase the harm she had caused, or the scars she had left behind. "So what now?" I asked, my voice cold but tinged with a hint of curiosity. "What happens after all this?" She met my gaze, her voice trembling. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Michael. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that everything I did, everything was a lie. I was being used." A silence settled between us, heavy and oppressive. I could feel the weight of her words, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something. A small slip of paper sitting beside my coffee cup. I glanced at it, then back at Claire, suspicion rising in my chest. "What's this?" I asked, picking it up carefully. Her eyes widened in fear. Don't look at that!" But it was too late. I unfolded the paper, and there it was. An address written hastily in a scrawl I recognized all too well. It was Vance's handwriting. The note read, "Come alone. Time is running out." I stared at the paper, the words burning into my mind. The trap had never truly been dismantled. Claire hadn't been the only one pulling strings all along. Someone else was still out there, still watching, still controlling the narrative. I stood up abruptly, slipping the note into my pocket. "You've led me here, Claire, but this is where it ends. I'm going after them, and you're either with me or you're not." Her face drained of color as she stood, her hands shaking. "Michael, please, don't do it. They'll—" The room seemed to go still, the tension hanging thick in the air. Claire's confident demeanor faltered for just a moment, her eyes narrowing as if she were weighing her next move. But it was too late. The walls were already closing in, and I could feel the weight of the truth pressing against me, igniting something inside that I hadn't fully understood until this very moment. "I don't need to explain myself to you, Michael," she said, her voice low. But I could hear the crack in it now. The mask was slipping. "You're too far gone to make any difference now." I took another step toward her, my jaw clenched, eyes fixed on hers. "You don't get it. I'm done being your pawn. I'm not playing your game anymore, Claire." She straightened, regaining a fraction of her composure, but it was clear. She wasn't as untouchable as she had once thought. "We'll see," she muttered, her voice colder now. I didn't wait for her to make the next move. I had already started to plan my counterattack. Vance's shadow shifted in the background, and for a split second, I wondered if he might be contemplating the same thing. But then, his voice broke through the stillness, as smooth as ever. "You're not in control here, Michael. This was never about you. This is bigger than anything you can comprehend," he said, his tone a mixture of amusement and something darker, something that made my blood run cold. I locked eyes with him, the full weight of his words crashing over me. "You think I'm still clueless? Think again. I've already started pulling strings of my own, Vance." His smile faltered, the first crack in his calculated exterior. For a moment, the silence between us stretched long, as though we were all waiting for the next piece to fall into place. Claire's gaze flicked nervously between me and Vance, a flicker of doubt passing across her face. Then, I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the door, barely visible in the shadows. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I recognized the silhouette. Sophia. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a rush of emotion, relief mixed with confusion. What was she doing here? How had she found me? The last thing I'd expected was for her to be involved in this mess. I took a step toward her, but Claire was quicker, raising a hand to stop me. "Don't even think about it," she hissed. "You've already lost." Sophia stepped into the room, her face set with a quiet resolve, her eyes not on Claire, but on me. "I know what's going on," she said, her voice steady, no hint of fear in it. "I know about the betrayal. I know about the lies. And I'm not leaving until this is over." The surprise hit me like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about? How did you—" "I've been doing some digging of my own," Sophia interrupted. "I couldn't just stand by and let you be destroyed by all of this." She took another step forward, her gaze flickering briefly to Claire and Vance. "And I'm not here to be anyone's victim." I could see the storm brewing in Claire's eyes, the anger bubbling up, but Sophia wasn't backing down. It was as if something inside her had been awakened, a side of her I hadn't seen before. A side I had never known was there. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Claire spat, her voice trembling with fury. "You think you can stop this? You think you can undo what's been done?" "I don't need to undo anything," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I'm here to make sure you never hurt anyone again." For a moment, there was silence. Claire's eyes flickered to Vance, then back to me, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was calculating her next move, figuring out how to regain control. But it was too late. The game had changed. Claire opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say another word, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. The noise grew louder, growing closer. Vance's eyes darted toward the door, and for the first time the calmness in his expression slipped. The plan I had put in motion was finally coming to fruition. "You called the cops?" Claire's voice rose in disbelief. Sophia met her gaze, coolly, a faint, knowing smile curling at the corners of her lips. "It's time for the truth to come out. Every last secret. You can't control this anymore." Vance turned to leave, but I was quicker. I grabbed his arm, stopping him dead, in his tracks. "Not so fast. I have a few things to say to you." His eyes narrowed, but there was no escape. The cops were on their way, and everything he'd worked so hard to hide was about to be exposed. "You don't have the power to do anything now," Vance said, his voice low, dangerous. "Not anymore," I agreed, the finality of it settling into my chest. As the sirens grew closer, Claire's eyes flicked desperately from me to Vance, and then to the door. But there was nowhere left to run. The end was near, and there was nothing she could do to change it. The door burst open, and officers flooded the room.